Maxwell Reed stood frozen as airport security officers flanked him on the private tarmac of Boston Logan International Airport. Nearby, a teenage black boy named Elijah Washington held his head high despite the handcuffs encircling his wrists. Passengers disembarking whispered and pointed at the unlikely pair. In Maxwell's arms, 6-month-old Sophia slept peacefully, the same infant who had screamed inconsolably for hours on the flight. Maxwell clutched his daughter tighter, his expression conflicted. The truth about what really happened between a Wall Street titan and a teenager from Roxbury would change everything forever. No one could have predicted how a chance encounter at 30,000 feet would completely reverse their fortunes. 8 hours earlier, Maxwell Reed had boarded the luxury private jet section of the commercial flight bound for San Francisco with mounting anxiety. His 6-month-old daughter Sophia was already fussing in his arms, and the journey had barely begun. As one of the wealthiest investment bankers in the country, Maxwell was accustomed to having problems solved with money or by his staff. But today was different. His wife Vivian had canceled at the last minute, called away to handle a family emergency with her mother in Europe. This left Maxwell alone with Sophia for the first time since her birth, a situation that terrified him more than any volatile market crash. As a 42-year-old workaholic who regularly closed $100 million deals without breaking a sweat, Maxwell found himself completely unprepared for the simple task of keeping his daughter content during a 6-hour flight. The first-class cabin crew had helped him settle in, discreetly exchanging glances at his obvious discomfort with the infant. Maxwell had brought an assortment of expensive toys, premium organic formula, and even a digital sound machine recommended by their nanny. But as the plane accelerated down the runway, Sophia began to cry with increasing intensity. By the time they reached cruising altitude, her cries had transformed into full-throated screams that seemed impossible from such a tiny body. Other first-class passengers, executives, celebrities behind sunglasses, and the quietly wealthy began shooting irritated glances his way. A silver-haired woman across the aisle pursed her lips and ostentatiously inserted noise-canceling earbuds. The lead flight attendant, Catherine Westfield, approached with practiced concern on her face. "Mr. Reed, is there anything we can assist you with?" she asked, her voice professionally sympathetic, but with an underlying tension that communicated the disruption was becoming unacceptable. Maxwell bounced Sophia awkwardly, his designer suit already stained with formula. "I've tried everything," he admitted, uncharacteristic desperation in his voice. "She won't take her bottle, the pacifier. Nothing seems to work." Catherine's smile remained fixed as she suggested, "Sometimes in these situations, we find it best to relocate families with young children to the economy section, where there's more ambient noise to mask the crying. I could arrange that for you, if you'd prefer." The suggestion clearly aimed at removing the disturbance rather than helping him stung Maxwell's pride. Before he could respond, movement from the economy section caught his attention. A teenage black boy was walking purposefully toward first class, ignoring a junior flight attendant who was trying to intercept him. "Sir, you need to return to your designated seat," the attendant was saying, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Passengers from economy aren't permitted in the premium cabin during flight." The boy, who couldn't have been more than 14 or 15, wore worn jeans and a faded blue hoodie from Roxbury Community College. His sneakers had been meticulously cleaned, but were clearly years old. Despite his youth, he carried himself with quiet confidence. "I think I can help with the baby," he said, his voice steady but respectful. Catherine moved immediately to block his path, her professional smile gone. "That won't be necessary. Please return to your seat now, or I'll need to involve the air marshal." Maxwell, desperate as Sophia's screams reached a new pitch, found himself reassessing the situation. His initial reaction, a mixture of surprise and unexamined bias at the sight of a young black teenager approaching, was quickly overtaken by the practical reality of his screaming daughter. "Wait," Maxwell said, his voice cutting through Sophia's cries. "If he thinks he can help, let him try." Catherine hesitated, clearly conflicted between enforcing cabin boundaries and obeying a highly valued customer. The boy took advantage of her hesitation to step forward. "I'm Elijah Washington," he said directly to Maxwell. I've got 4 younger siblings at home, and I know a few tricks that might help." The first-class cabin had fallen silent, except for Sophia's wails, as all eyes turned to the unexpected drama unfolding. Catherine's posture remained rigid with disapproval, as Elijah approached Maxwell and the screaming infant. "My mom works 3 jobs," Elijah explained quickly, seeming to understand he needed to establish credibility. "I've been taking care of my brothers and sisters since I was 8. The youngest is only 10 months old." Maxwell studied the boy's face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only calm, confidence, and something else, intelligence, that shone through despite the circumstances. Sophia's face had turned an alarming shade of red, her tiny hands balled into fists as she continued her relentless crying. Maxwell had tried every suggestion from the baby books, online forums, and their experienced nanny, all to no avail. His decision was made in an instant of parental desperation. "What do you have in mind?" he asked Elijah, ignoring Catherine's sharp intake of breath. "Sometimes it's about pattern and rhythm," Elijah said, holding out his hands. "May I?" The request to hold his daughter made Maxwell hesitate. A lifetime of media messages and unconscious biases flashed through his mind, warnings about strangers, about young men from the inner city, about danger. Then Sophia let out another piercing wail, and Maxwell surrendered his daughter into Elijah's waiting arms. The transformation was immediate and astonishing. Elijah cradled Sophia with practiced ease, one hand supporting her head, while the other began a rhythmic pattern of light touches along her back. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 tap. Simultaneously, he began humming a sequence of notes that somehow complemented the tapping pattern. The mathematical precision was subtle but unmistakable. Within 30 seconds, Sophia's screams subsided to whimpers. Within a minute, she was gazing up at Elijah with wide, curious eyes. By the second minute, her eyelids were drooping as exhaustion took over. The entire first-class cabin watched in stunned silence as the baby, who had been inconsolable for nearly an hour, settled peacefully against the teenager's chest. "It's a mathematical sequence," Elijah explained quietly, continuing the gentle pattern. "Fibonacci with some modifications. Babies respond to patterns they can predict, but that aren't too simple. It reminds them of heartbeats, but adds enough variation to keep their attention." Maxwell stared in disbelief as Sophia's breathing deepened into sleep. "That's incredible," he managed. Catherine cleared her throat. "Well, that's certainly helpful. Thank you, young man. You can return to your seat now." But Maxwell had just endured an hour of helplessness and wasn't about to send away the one person who had successfully soothed his daughter. "Actually," he said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him, "I'd appreciate it if Elijah joined me for a while in case Sophia wakes up again." Catherine's smile tightened. "I'm afraid that seat is reserved for premium passengers." Maxwell cut her off with the calm authority he typically reserved for boardrooms. "I'll pay for the upgrade, and please bring whatever meal he would like." The awkward moment stretched until Catherine nodded stiffly and asked Elijah for his meal preference, her tone notably cooler than when addressing other passengers. As she walked away, Maxwell noticed several passengers watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval at the teenager's presence in first class. Elijah seemed to sense it too, but showed no reaction beyond focusing on Sophia. "How did you learn to do that?" Maxwell asked, genuinely curious. "The pattern thing with babies?" Elijah continued the gentle rhythm as he spoke. "I figured it out when my sister Amara was colicky. Mom was working nights, and nothing would quiet her down. I started experimenting with different patterns based on what I was learning in math class." He shrugged slightly. "After a while, I could predict which sequences would work based on their breathing and cry patterns. Different babies respond to different mathematical sequences." Maxwell listened with growing interest. "You're clearly good with numbers. What grade are you in?" A flash of something pride mixed with wariness crossed Elijah's face. "I'm a sophomore, but I take advanced math classes through a special program. That's actually why I'm on this flight. I'm heading to the National Mathematics Invitational in San Francisco." Maxwell's eyebrows rose. "The NMI? That's extremely competitive." Elijah nodded, a small smile appearing. "Only 50 students nationwide get invited. I'm representing my district in Roxbury." For the next 20 minutes, as Catherine pointedly served other passengers while ignoring their section, Maxwell learned about Elijah's remarkable journey. Despite attending an underfunded school with few advanced programs, Elijah had taught himself calculus using library books and free online courses. His mother worked as a hospital orderly, a convenience store clerk, and did evening bookkeeping for a local business, all to support 5 children after their father had been incarcerated 6 years ago on a minor drug charge that would have likely resulted in probation in a wealthier neighborhood. Throughout their conversation, Maxwell couldn't help noticing how flight attendants checked on their section more frequently than others, how other passengers stared when Elijah spoke too loudly or laughed, and how Catherine's demeanor transformed from cold professionalism with Elijah to warm deference when addressing Maxwell directly. Most striking was how Elijah seemed accustomed to it all, navigating the subtle slights with practiced ease, while Maxwell found himself increasingly uncomfortable witnessing the disparate treatment. Their conversation deepened as the flight continued over America's heartland, and Maxwell discovered more remarkable things about the teenager who had rescued him from parental humiliation. Elijah demonstrated knowledge of advanced mathematical concepts that even Maxwell, with his Wharton MBA and years of quantitative financial analysis, struggled to follow completely. When Sophia stirred, Elijah immediately adjusted his pattern, responding to subtle cues that Maxwell couldn't even detect. The genuine connection forming between them made what happened next all the more jarring. "So what takes you to San Francisco?" Elijah asked, carefully handing the sleeping Sophia back to her father. "Business or pleasure?" Maxwell settled his daughter into the custom travel bassinet the flight attendant had finally brought over. "Actually, I'm going to the same event you are," he revealed, watching Elijah's expression shift from confusion to shock. "Pinnacle Capital. My investment firm is the primary sponsor of the National Mathematics Invitational. I'm serving as one of the judges for the final round." Elijah straightened in his seat, his casual demeanor suddenly replaced with awareness of the unexpected connection. "You're one of the judges? I had no idea." Maxwell nodded, feeling strangely apologetic. "It's my first year participating. Our company established the scholarship prize 3 years ago, full university funding plus internships for the top performers." He hesitated before adding, "To be honest, I'm surprised I hadn't heard about you." The selection committee reviews all the finalists. Something flashed across Elijah's face, a momentary guard that went up, then carefully came back down. "Well, I was a last-minute addition. One of the original finalists dropped out, and I was next on the list." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My application was complicated. Some of my work doesn't follow standard approaches." Maxwell was about to ask for clarification when Catherine appeared with Elijah's meal, a burger that looked significantly less appetizing than the gourmet options Maxwell had observed being served to other first-class passengers. She placed it down without the customary description of ingredients or offer of additional services that Maxwell had received with his own meal. "Will there be anything else?" she asked, addressing only Maxwell despite placing Elijah's food. Maxwell noticed the difference immediately. "Elijah, would you like anything else? Perhaps dessert?" I believe there was a chocolate option that looked quite good. The simple act of directing the question to Elijah himself, rather than speaking about him in the third person, seemed to catch Catherine off guard. Before Elijah could answer, another passenger, a silver-haired executive type from across the aisle, approached the flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I paid for first class specifically for a quiet, premium experience. I don't mean to complain, but there seem to be some unusual accommodations being made today." His gaze flickered meaningfully toward Elijah. Catherine lowered her voice, though not enough to prevent Maxwell from hearing. "I understand your concerns, sir. I've already spoken with the captain about the situation." Maxwell felt a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. Before he could respond, the plane suddenly jolted, sending a ripple of gasps through the cabin as it encountered unexpected turbulence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the announcement. "We've hit some rough air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately." Flight attendants, suspend service and secure the cabin. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Drinks spilled, items tumbled from tray tables, and a few passengers yelped in surprise. Maxwell instinctively checked Sophia's bassinet, relieved to find her still sleeping soundly, secured by the safety straps. In the chaos, his laptop slid from his seat pocket onto the floor, skidding several feet down the aisle. More concerning were his custom platinum and diamond cufflinks, and his vintage Patek Philippe watch graduation gifts from his grandfather, which he had removed for comfort earlier and placed in the small storage compartment of his armrest. The compartment had popped open during the turbulence, and the valuable items were no longer visible. As the plane stabilized and passengers began collecting scattered belongings, Maxwell bent to retrieve his laptop, finding it wedged beneath a seat 2 rows ahead. Upon returning to his seat, he discovered the missing jewelry was nowhere to be found. Catherine was already assisting another passenger when Maxwell caught her attention. "Excuse me, but I seem to have lost some personal items during the turbulence, a watch and cufflinks. They're family heirlooms with significant sentimental value." Catherine's professional demeanor returned instantly. "Of course, Mr. Reed. We'll make an announcement and help you look right away." She turned immediately to the cabin intercom, but not before her gaze drifted pointedly toward Elijah, who was helping an elderly woman retrieve her fallen reading glasses. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation regarding some missing valuable items belonging to one of our premium passengers. If anyone has found a watch or cufflinks, please alert the cabin crew immediately. We take these matters very seriously." The emphasis on very seriously hung in the air, and Maxwell felt a creeping discomfort as he noticed several passengers glancing in Elijah's direction. Elijah returned to his seat, seemingly unaware of the subtle accusation forming around him. "Anything I can help look for?" he asked Maxwell innocently. Before Maxwell could respond, Catherine returned with another crew member. "Mr. Reed, we'll need to conduct a thorough search of the immediate area. Perhaps your guest wouldn't mind returning to his assigned seat while we resolve this matter?" The implication was clear, and Maxwell found himself caught in an unexpected moral dilemma. The boy who had rescued him from hours of parental distress was now being subtly accused of theft without a shred of evidence. Yet the valuable items were indeed missing, and the social pressure from other passengers and staff was palpable. For the first time in years, Maxwell Reed, decisive leader, confident billionaire, man of action, found himself paralyzed by indecision. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin transformed in minutes. What had been merely subtle disapproval of Elijah's presence now crystallized into open suspicion as Catherine's announcement hung in the air. 2 additional flight attendants appeared, along with a plainclothes air marshal who had been seated near the cockpit standard protocol for missing valuables, Catherine explained. But Maxwell noted the speed and seriousness of the response seemed disproportionate to a simple lost-and-found situation. The air marshal, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair who introduced himself only as Officer Daniels, took immediate control of the situation. "Sir, can you describe the missing items in detail?" he asked Maxwell, positioning himself so that he partially blocked Elijah from leaving the row. Maxwell described his grandfather's vintage Patek Philippe and the custom platinum cufflinks with inlaid diamonds, aware that their combined value exceeded $100,000. Officer Daniels nodded, making notes in a small book. "And when did you last see these items?" Maxwell explained about removing them for comfort and storing them in the armrest compartment before the turbulence hit. Throughout this exchange, Elijah sat silently, his expression carefully neutral, though Maxwell could see tension building in the teenager's shoulders and jaw. Officer Daniels turned his attention to Elijah. "Young man, I'm going to need to ask you a few questions as well. Can you tell me why you're seated in the first-class cabin when your boarding pass is for economy?" The question immediately cast Elijah as out of place, an intruder rather than an invited guest. Maxwell started to interject. "I invited him to, but Officer Daniels raised a hand." "I understand, sir, but I need to hear directly from the young man." Elijah met the officer's gaze steadily. "Mr. Reed invited me to sit here after I helped with his baby daughter. She was crying, and I know techniques to calm infants." The explanation, though completely truthful, sounded thin in the context of the missing valuables. Officer Daniels nodded without warmth. "I see. And did you at any point notice or handle Mr. Reed's personal belongings?" Maxwell felt a surge of indignation at the direct accusation, but before he could protest, a voice called out from several rows back. "The kid was walking around during the turbulence," said a middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit. "I saw him moving near where the items went missing." This was blatantly false. Elijah had been helping the elderly woman with her glasses, but murmurs of agreement spread among some passengers. Maxwell recognized one of the men as Victor Kensington, a competing investment banker who had never forgiven Maxwell for winning the Morgan account 3 years ago. Officer Daniels gestured to Elijah. "Please stand up and empty your pockets." The request, effectively a public search, caused a visible flinch from Elijah, though he complied with dignified silence. He pulled out a basic smartphone with a cracked screen, a folded sheet of paper that appeared to be his competition invitation, a few dollars in crumpled bills, and a half-empty pack of gum. Officer Daniels examined each item before asking Elijah to turn his pockets inside out, then patting down his hoodie. The public humiliation was methodical and thorough. Maxwell felt growing discomfort witnessing the scene. "This really isn't necessary," he began. "I'm sure the items just fell somewhere during the turbulence." Catherine stepped forward with professional concern. "Mr. Reed, we take theft very seriously on our flights. We need to follow protocol." Victor Kensington added loudly, "Exactly. Rules apply to everyone, regardless of who invited whom." The social pressure was immense. Maxwell had navigated countless high-stakes negotiations and confrontations in his career, but this situation, with its undercurrents of racial bias, class tension, and public scrutiny, left him uncharacteristically hesitant. His momentary silence was devastating in its effect. Elijah, who had maintained his composure throughout the search, looked at Maxwell with a flash of betrayal in his eyes before the mask of careful neutrality returned. Officer Daniels, finding nothing on Elijah's person, was undeterred. "We should check his original seat and personal items in economy." This suggestion, continuing the humiliation by extending the search to Elijah's belongings, was the moment Maxwell should have objected forcefully. Instead, he managed only a week. "Is that really necessary?" Catherine was already nodding. "Standard procedure, Mr. Reed. We'll be thorough but discreet." Officer Daniels gestured for Elijah to follow him to economy class. As Elijah stood to comply, he looked directly at Maxwell. "I didn't take anything," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the public accusation. The simple dignity of the statement hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Elijah followed Officer Daniels and Catherine toward economy class, walking with his head held high despite the stares and whispers of passengers. While they were gone, Maxwell searched his seating area again, finding nothing. Sophia stirred in her bassinet, perhaps sensing the tension, and he gently rocked her back to sleep. 20 minutes later, Officer Daniels returned alone. "We've conducted a search of the young man's belongings. Nothing was found, but we've asked him to remain in his assigned seat for the remainder of the flight." Maxwell felt simultaneous relief and shame. "So the items are still missing?" The officer nodded. "The search continues. We've asked cabin crew to check under all seats and in the lavatories. Sometimes items slide quite far during turbulence." His tone remained professional but held an undertone of skepticism, as if he still suspected Elijah despite the lack of evidence. Shortly afterward, Catherine returned with news. "Mr. Reed, we've located your laptop, which was wedged between seats as you found earlier. However, we're still searching for the jewelry." Maxwell nodded, his mind on Elijah and the humiliation the boy had endured. "What happened to his belongings during the search?" he asked. Catherine looked momentarily confused by the question. "Everything was returned to him, of course. Though there was a small issue with a notebook, he had some pages may have been damaged when the bag was emptied. He seemed quite upset about it, though Officer Daniels assured him it was unintentional." Maxwell felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "What kind of notebook?" Catherine shrugged. "Just some scribbles, equations, and such. Homework, I assume." But Maxwell knew immediately it must have been more than homework. For a mathematics prodigy heading to a national competition, those scribbles likely represented original work and ideas, intellectual property potentially worth far more than the missing jewelry. The realization of what had happened a teenager humiliated, his work damaged, based on nothing more than his race and economic status sat like lead in Maxwell's chest. Yet he remained in his comfortable first-class seat, Sophia sleeping peacefully beside him, saying nothing. An announcement from the captain that they were beginning their descent into San Francisco broke the tense atmosphere that had settled over the first-class cabin. As passengers secured their belongings and prepared for landing, Catherine approached Maxwell's row once again, this time with a different expression, one of embarrassment mixed with forced professionalism. "Mr. Reed, I'm pleased to inform you that your watch and cufflinks have been located," she said, her voice carefully modulated. They were found in Seat 4C. Maxwell recalled that Seat 4C was occupied by an older white businessman who had been among those watching Elijah's public search with thinly disguised suspicion. "May I ask who found them?" Maxwell inquired, already suspecting the answer. Catherine hesitated. The passenger in that seat discovered them while preparing for landing. He believes they must have slid there during the turbulence. The explanation was plausible but convenient. Too convenient given the timing and previous accusations. Maxwell accepted the returned items with a curt nod. "And has Elijah been informed that he's been cleared of any suspicion?" The question caused Catherine visible discomfort. "Officer Daniels has spoken with him, yes." A standard apology for any inconvenience was extended. The bureaucratic language disguised what must have been a perfunctory acknowledgement at best. "I'd like to speak with him," Maxwell said, rising from his seat. Catherine placed a hand on the back of the adjacent seat. "I'm afraid we're preparing for landing, sir. All passengers need to remain in their assigned seats with seatbelts fastened. Perhaps after we've arrived at the gate?" Maxwell reluctantly complied, settling back as the plane began its final approach. The jewelry felt heavy in his Palm family heirlooms that had inadvertently caused the public humiliation of a 14-year-old boy whose only crime had been offering kindness to a struggling father and his infant daughter. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Maxwell gathered his belongings and prepared Sophia for deplaning, his mind racing with how to make amends. When first-class passengers were invited to exit, he lingered, intending to wait for Elijah. Catherine, seeming to guess his intentions, informed him that a car service was waiting at the curb for him, and Sophia, a courtesy for Pinnacle Capital executives that suddenly felt like an expedient way to separate him from Elijah. Still, Maxwell waited near the jet bridge as economy passengers filed out. When Elijah finally appeared, the teenager's expression closed immediately upon seeing Maxwell. Gone was the open, confident young man who had approached a crying baby with solutions. In his place stood a guarded adolescent who had just experienced firsthand how quickly privilege could turn to prejudice. "Elijah, I wanted to apologize," Maxwell began, stepping toward him. "What happened was inexcusable. I should have spoken up more forcefully." Elijah adjusted the strap of his worn backpack, which Maxwell now noticed had been hastily repacked, items stuffed in haphazardly rather than with care. "It's fine, Mr. Reed." "Nothing I haven't seen before." The resigned acceptance in his voice made the situation worse, not better. Maxwell reached into his pocket and withdrew his wallet. "Please, let me compensate you for the trouble and for your notebook. I understand some pages were damaged." Elijah's expression hardened. "I don't need your money." The quiet dignity in his refusal stopped Maxwell mid-sentence. "My calculations can be redone. They're in my head, but respect and dignity can't be paid for." Before Maxwell could respond, a harried-looking flight attendant appeared. "Mr. Reed, your car is waiting, and the driver is concerned about the delay." Caught between obligations, Maxwell hesitated. "Elijah, where are you staying in San Francisco? Perhaps we could." But Elijah was already moving past him toward the terminal. "I have to check in with my competition advisor." "Good luck with your daughter, Mr. Reed." As Maxwell watched him disappear into the crowd, a voice behind him made him turn. "Reed, there you are." It was Bradley Winston, Pinnacle's West Coast director and Maxwell's longtime business partner. Bradley clapped him on the shoulder while cooing at Sophia. We were about to send a search party. Cars waiting, and we've got the pre-competition briefing in 2 hours. As they walked toward the exit, Bradley lowered his voice. Was that the Washington kid I just saw? The late edition from Roxbury? Maxwell nodded, surprised. You know about him? Bradley's laugh held no humor. Of course. Kid's algorithm work is potentially revolutionary, could change how we model market predictions. We've been tracking him for months. Something in Bradley's tone set off alarm bells in Maxwell's mind. Tracking him? He's just a contestant like the others. Bradley gave him a sidelong glance as they approached the waiting town car. Come on, Reed, don't be naive. You know how these things work. We sponsor these competitions to identify and acquire talent and intellectual property early. His approach to predictive sequencing could be worth billions in the right applications, but the kid has no idea. New resources, new connections, new patents. As they settled into the car, Sophia still miraculously asleep in her carrier, Maxwell felt increasing unease. What exactly are you saying, Bradley? His partner arranged his features into an expression of innocent surprise. Nothing unethical, if that's what you're worried about. The competition terms clearly state that all presented work becomes part of Pinnacle's research portfolio. Standard practice. The scholarship winners get education funding. We get their innovations. Fair exchange. The car pulled away from the curb, and through the window, Maxwell spotted Elijah, waiting alone at the public transit stop, consulting what appeared to be a map on his cracked phone screen. The contrast between the teenager's solitary figure and Maxwell's luxury town car struck him with unexpected force. Bradley was still talking, reviewing the competition schedule and the judge's instructions, but Maxwell found his attention wandering back to his partner's casual revelation. Pinnacle had been tracking Elijah, a child from one of Boston's most disadvantaged neighborhoods, seeing him not as a young person with extraordinary potential, but as an unprotected source of valuable intellectual property. Even worse, Maxwell had witnessed firsthand how quickly people in positions of authority had been willing to assume the worst about Elijah, based solely on his appearance and background. The damaged notebook took on new significance in this context. Had it been truly accidental, or was it possible Maxwell hardly wanted to consider it, that someone had deliberately wanted to see what Elijah was working on under the pretext of a security search? The thought was disturbing not just for its immediate implications, but because it forced Maxwell to confront uncomfortable questions about the systems and institutions he had navigated so successfully, his entire life systems, that now seemed designed to extract value from people like Elijah, while offering little in return. The Street Regis San Francisco embodied luxury in every detail, from the soaring lobby with its custom artwork to the attentive staff who seemed to anticipate needs before they arose. Maxwell had stayed here dozens of times for business, but today the opulence felt different, excessive rather than impressive as he checked in with Sophia. The National Mathematics Invitational had reserved the entire conference level, with Pinnacle Capital's logos prominently displayed on banners and digital screens throughout the hotel. After settling Sophia with the hotel's premium childcare service, a convenience available only to the highest-tier guests, Maxwell made his way to the executive briefing, scheduled before the competition's opening. Reception. He arrived early, finding only Bradley and 3 other Pinnacle executives in the wood-paneled boardroom. Their conversation halted abruptly when he entered. Maxwell. Perfect timing, said Richard Hargrove, Pinnacle's chief strategy officer, with forced enthusiasm. Bradley was just updating us on some of the contestants. Maxwell took a seat, noting how the men exchanged glances. Anything interesting I should know as a judge? He asked casually, watching their reactions. Richard cleared his throat. Just reviewing the usual parameters for identifying candidates with potential for our development pipeline. He slid a tablet across the table. These are the 10 contestants we've flagged as particularly promising. You'll notice we've included detailed background information beyond their mathematical abilities. Maxwell scrolled through the document, increasingly disturbed by what he found. Each profile contained not just academic achievements but family financial status, race, neighborhood demographics, and a section labeled leverage points essentially, assessments of how desperately each student needed Pinnacle's scholarship money. Elijah's profile was noticeably marked with a red flag. Under development potential, someone had written, highest value algorithms, minimal protection resources, no legal representation, single-parent household optimal acquisition target. The clinical language made Maxwell's stomach turn. This seems excessive, he commented, keeping his tone neutral. Aren't we just judging mathematical ability? Bradley laughed. Come on, Reed. You know better than that. We're a business, not a charity. The competition is just efficient recruitment. Speaking of which, we need to discuss the Washington kid. Richard leaned forward. His algorithm work is promising, but there are concerns about fit. The board feels that certain demographics respond better to our corporate culture and client expectations. The euphemisms were paper-thin. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. Certain demographics? Richard had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. You know what I mean. Our clients expect a certain profile when dealing with their financial futures. It's just business reality. Bradley cut in more bluntly. Look, we've never had a scholarship winner from that background, and frankly, we prefer to keep it that way. The math department can extract what they need from his work without the complications of bringing him into the program. The conversation was interrupted as more executives and judges filed in for the official briefing, but the message had been unmistakable. Pinnacle had no intention of letting Elijah win, regardless of his mathematical abilities. They wanted his ideas, not him. After the briefing, Maxwell made his way to the main registration area, where contestants were checking in and receiving their materials. The contrast between the corporate executives and the nervous teenagers was stark. Most of the young mathematicians came with parents or teachers, supportive adults who helped them navigate the intimidating process. Spotting Elijah standing alone at the check-in desk, Maxwell changed direction to approach him, but paused when he saw the interaction unfolding. "I'm sorry, but we need a parent or guardian to complete these liability waivers," the registration attendant was saying, despite the fact that other teenagers were being processed without this requirement. "My mother couldn't come," Elijah explained patiently. "I have a signed permission form and a notarized letter from her." He produced the documents from his backpack. The attendant examined them with exaggerated scrutiny. "These seem irregular. Let me check with my supervisor." As the attendant walked away with his papers, Elijah stood waiting, his face carefully neutral despite the clear differential treatment. Maxwell was about to intervene when Bradley appeared at his side. "Ah, watching our little prodigy? Don't worry, we'll process him eventually. Just standard extra verification for unusual cases." The casual cruelty of making Elijah wait unnecessarily struck Maxwell as deliberate a power play designed to put him at a psychological disadvantage before the competition even began. Throughout the evening, Maxwell observed more instances of subtle discrimination. Hotel staff repeatedly mistook Elijah for service personnel rather than a competitor. During the welcome reception, judges and executives engaged enthusiastically with other contestants while only briefly acknowledging Elijah. Most concerning was an announcement of last-minute rule changes that seemed specifically designed to disadvantage Elijah's approach to mathematics, requiring traditional proofs for all solutions rather than allowing the algorithmic methods that were his strength. Maxwell found himself increasingly uncomfortable as he witnessed how systems he had taken for granted operated to maintain certain hierarchies. At the hotel bar later that night, he overheard two security personnel discussing instructions they'd received. "Keep an extra eye on the kid from Roxbury. Management wants to know if he meets with anyone or goes anywhere unusual." The casual surveillance of a 14-year-old boy was justified with a shrug and a comment about risk management. By the time Maxwell returned to his suite to check on Sophia, he found himself in a strange state of clarity he had never experienced before. The comfortable world he inhabited, from first-class flights to luxury hotels to the exclusive financial industry, suddenly appeared as a system designed not just for comfort, but for exclusion. Sophia began crying as the night wore on, her schedule disrupted by travel and strange surroundings. Nothing Maxwell tried would soothe her, and the hotel staff suggested calling their premium childcare service again. Instead, Maxwell found himself wandering the hotel with his fussing daughter, eventually discovering Elijah in a small study lounge off the main lobby. The teenager wasn't alone. He had gathered a small group of younger contestants from diverse backgrounds, patiently explaining complex mathematical concepts they would need for tomorrow's competition. Despite his own disadvantaged position, he was freely sharing his knowledge. When Sophia's cries interrupted the impromptu tutorial, Elijah looked up with recognition. "Sounds like someone's missing her pattern," he said with a small smile, apparently willing to set aside the humiliation from the flight. Without hesitation, he approached and held out his hands. "May I?" The simple offer of help from a boy who had every reason to reject Maxwell made the billion-dollar empire and all its exclusionary practices seem suddenly small and shameful in comparison. The first day of competition dawned with San Francisco wrapped in its characteristic fog, the Golden Gate Bridge visible only as a ghostly outline from the hotel's upper floors. Maxwell had spent a restless night after returning to his suite with a peacefully sleeping Sophia, his mind replaying everything he had witnessed and his own complicity in a system that now seemed increasingly predatory, rather than merely competitive. The morning brought a fresh complication as Bradley cornered him at the judge's breakfast. "Good news," his partner announced with evident satisfaction. "The board approved our Special Innovation Acquisition Prize. We're announcing it before the first round today." Maxwell looked up from his coffee. "What innovation prize?" This wasn't mentioned in yesterday's briefing. Bradley slid a document across the table with Pinnacle's letterhead. "Last-minute addition. $100,000 and guaranteed internship for the most commercially viable mathematical innovation, regardless of overall competition placement." Maxwell scanned the document, his concern growing as he reached the fine print. "This requires contestants to transfer all intellectual property rights to Pinnacle as a condition of accepting the prize." Bradley shrugged, clearly unconcerned. "Standard industry practice. The kids get money and opportunity. We get their ideas. Fair exchange." The timing and structure of the prize seemed transparently targeted at someone like Elijah, a financially struggling prodigy who might be tempted by immediate cash despite the long-term value of his work. "Was this approved by the competition's academic board?" Maxwell asked. Bradley waved dismissively. "They work for us, Reed. We fund the whole show. Speaking of which, your judging assignment came through. You'll be evaluating the calculus variation section well away from the algorithm innovations. Thought it best to avoid any appearance of favoritism given your little encounter with the Washington kid." The strategic separation was obvious. Keep Maxwell away from any judging that might impact Elijah's standing. As contestants and spectators filed into the main competition hall, Maxwell noticed Elijah sitting alone, reviewing notes from a partially damaged notebook. The announcement of the special prize came just before the first round began, generating excited whispers among contestants and parents. Maxwell watched Elijah's reaction carefully, noting how the boy's expression shifted from interest to wariness as he read through the printed terms. The competition itself was structured in rounds of increasing difficulty, with contestants eliminated at each stage. Maxwell performed his judging duties diligently while keeping tabs on Elijah's progress through updates on the digital scoreboard. Despite the rule changes that seemed designed to hinder him, Elijah was advancing steadily, his solutions demonstrating remarkable insight even when forced into traditional formats that weren't his strength. During a break between rounds, Maxwell overheard two other judges discussing Elijah's performance. "The kid's solutions are unorthodox but effective," said one, a mathematics professor from Stanford. "His approach to the probability sequence was unlike anything I've seen from someone his age." The other judge, a Pinnacle executive, nodded while frowning. "Impressive, but concerning. Non-standard approaches are harder to evaluate fairly. We should apply extra scrutiny to ensure everything follows proper mathematical rigor." The message was clear: Elijah would be held to a higher standard than his peers. As the day progressed, Maxwell noticed other concerning patterns. Elijah was consistently asked more challenging follow-up questions than other contestants during the verbal defense portions. When technical issues arose with the competition tablets, other students received immediate assistance, while Elijah waited nearly 10 minutes for help, losing valuable time. Most troubling was an incident during the afternoon round, when a judge interrupted Elijah mid-solution with questions about his unusual notation system criticism, not leveled at other contestants who used identical notation. Despite these obstacles, Elijah maintained his position among the top 5 contestants as the first day concluded. Maxwell watched him exit the hall, still alone, while other students celebrated with parents and coaches. Making a decision, Maxwell approached Elijah in the relative privacy of a side corridor. "Impressive performance today," he said, keeping his voice low, "especially given the circumstances." Elijah looked up, wariness evident in his expression. "Just doing my best, Mr. Reed. That's all any of us can do." The mature response from a 14-year-old struck Maxwell forcefully. "I wanted to tell you something about the special prize they announced." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "The intellectual property terms are extremely one-sided. Your algorithms, especially your predictive sequencing work, could be worth far more than they're offering." Elijah's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know about my predictive sequencing?" "That's not part of the competition materials." The question caught Maxwell off guard, revealing how much information Pinnacle had gathered about Elijah's work without his knowledge. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. There are aspects of how this competition operates that you should be aware of." Before he could continue, Bradley appeared at the end of the hallway, his expression darkening upon seeing them together. "Reed, there you are. The judge's evaluation session is starting." He approached quickly, positioning himself between Maxwell and Elijah. "Contestants should be in the preparation room, young man. This area is for official personnel only." The dismissal was thinly veiled, and Elijah recognized it immediately. "Of course, sir. I was just leaving." As Elijah walked away, Bradley gripped Maxwell's arm with unusual force. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "Judges are explicitly prohibited from private conversations with contestants." His voice dropped to a harsh whisper, "especially about our proprietary prize structure." Maxwell pulled his arm free. "I'm ensuring the competition is fair. Something that seems increasingly questionable." Bradley's expression hardened. "Be very careful, Reed. You have significant personal interests tied to Pinnacle's success. Your divorce settlement, Sophia's trust fund, your voting shares all contractually linked to your continued good standing with the board." The threat was explicit, leveraging Maxwell's daughter against him. Before Maxwell could respond, hotel security approached them. "Excuse me, gentlemen. We have a situation requiring Mr. Winston's attention." The head of security leaned closer. "It's regarding the contestant you flagged for surveillance." He attempted to access the judge's preparation materials. Bradley's expression shifted to satisfaction. "I knew it. Detain him until we determine the appropriate response." Maxwell interjected immediately. "That's absurd. He was just in this hallway with me." The security chief shook his head. "This occurred 20 minutes ago in the business center, sir. We have it on camera." The manufactured nature of the accusation was transparent to Maxwell now, though he would have likely accepted it without question just days earlier. "I want to see this footage immediately," he demanded, using the authoritative tone that had served him well in countless boardrooms. "And I want to be present for any questioning of the contestant." Bradley's eyes narrowed dangerously. "That won't be necessary, Reed. This is a security matter now." The implied message was clear: Maxwell needed to back down or face consequences himself. For the first time in his career, Maxwell Reed found himself standing at a moral crossroads where the path of least resistance led back to his comfortable life of privilege, while the other path, standing up for what was clearly right, threatened everything he had built. The alleged security footage proved to be ambiguous, at best showing Elijah entering the business center and using a computer, but nothing that clearly indicated accessing unauthorized materials. Nevertheless, Bradley and the competition officials used the incident to justify increased restrictions on Elijah, including requiring him to present his solutions under direct supervision and limiting his access to the competition resources available to other contestants. Maxwell argued forcefully against these measures in an emergency meeting of judges and organizers, pointing out the lack of concrete evidence and the pattern of differential treatment. His objections were noted but overruled, with Bradley skillfully framing Maxwell's concerns as personal bias due to their encounter on the flight. The finals approached with tension mounting on multiple fronts. Elijah continued to perform exceptionally despite the obstacles placed in his path, his mathematical insights increasingly impossible to ignore even by judges instructed to find fault with his work. Meanwhile, Maxwell discovered something far more concerning when he overheard Bradley speaking with Pinnacle's legal team the night before the final round. "The patents are already filed under Pinnacle's name," Bradley was saying. "Based on the notebook materials we acquired and the competition submissions, our tech team has reconstructed the core algorithms and implemented them in our trading systems." The lawyer sounded concerned. "But the competition isn't even complete. How did you acquire sufficient detail to file patent claims?" Bradley laughed. "Let's just say the security search on the flight was very thorough, and our photography very discreet. We have everything we need regardless of the competition outcome." Maxwell felt cold rage building as he realized the full extent of the scheme. The damaged notebook, the security search, the surveillance, all part of a coordinated effort to steal intellectual property from a 14-year-old boy from one of Boston's poorest neighborhoods. The competition itself was merely theater, designed to give a veneer of legitimacy to what was essentially corporate theft. That night, as Maxwell returned to his suite to check on Sophia, he found her feverish and fussy. The hotel doctor was called and diagnosed a minor ear infection, likely exacerbated by the recent flight, but recommended monitoring her condition overnight. As Maxwell sat holding his daughter, trying to soothe her discomfort, his phone rang repeatedly with messages from Bradley demanding his presence at a pre-final strategy meeting. The competing responsibilities created a moment of clarity. For years, Maxwell had justified his absence from his daughter's life with the importance of his work, the value of providing financial security. Yet, sitting here now, holding Sophia as she whimpered in discomfort, the empire of wealth and privilege he had built seemed hollow compared to the simple human connection of caring for his child. Similarly, the moral choice regarding Elijah suddenly seemed obvious rather than complicated. Around midnight, as Sophia finally settled into restless sleep, Maxwell's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a Boston area code he didn't recognize. Stepping into the suite's sitting area to avoid waking Sophia, he answered to find himself speaking with Linda Washington, Elijah's mother. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice was tired but determined. "I apologize for calling so late. The hotel connected me to your room. I'm at San Francisco International Airport." Maxwell was surprised. "Mrs. Washington? I thought you couldn't make it to the competition." She sighed. "I couldn't afford to miss more shifts, but Elijah called earlier. He tried to sound fine, but a mother knows when her child is hurting. I used our emergency savings for a last-minute flight. The sacrifice such a decision must have required was immediately apparent to Maxwell. "Where are you staying?" he asked, already guessing the answer. "I'll figure something out," she replied with dignity that reminded him powerfully of her son. "I just need to know which shuttle goes toward the competition hotel." Maxwell made an immediate decision. "Mrs. Washington, please take a taxi directly to the Street Regis. I'll arrange everything. And if you wouldn't mind, I could use your help with something." When Linda Washington arrived at the hotel an hour later, Maxwell explained the situation with Sophia and his need to address the mounting crisis with the competition. Without hesitation, Linda, who worked night shifts as a hospital orderly, offered to watch over Sophia while Maxwell handled the situation with her son. "I've raised 5 children through every illness imaginable," she said with quiet confidence as she settled into the chair beside Sophia's crib. "We'll be just fine." Trusting his daughter to this remarkable woman he had just met, Maxwell headed to his confrontation with Bradley and the Pinnacle executives, armed with evidence he had gathered throughout the evening, copies of emails, recorded conversations, and documentation of the systematic discrimination and intellectual property theft that had been orchestrated against Elijah Washington. The final round of the competition was scheduled to begin in 6 hours. But Maxwell knew the real contest, the one for basic fairness and dignity, couldn't wait until morning. He found Bradley and 4 other Pinnacle executives in the hotel's private lounge, strategizing their final approach to ensuring the competition produced their desired outcome. Their conversation halted abruptly when Maxwell entered. "Reed, there you are," Bradley said with false joviality. "We were just discussing tomorrow's judging parameters. Your daughter's condition improve?" The pretense of concern was transparent. Maxwell placed a flash drive on the table between them. "We need to talk about Elijah Washington and what Pinnacle has been doing." Bradley's expression hardened immediately. "There's nothing to discuss. The competition protocols are established." Maxwell shook his head. "I'm not talking about the competition. I'm talking about corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and systematic discrimination, all directed at a 14-year-old boy. This drive contains evidence of everything, including your admission about stealing his algorithms and filing patents based on photographed pages from his notebook." The room fell silent as the executives exchanged glances. Finally, Bradley leaned forward. "You're making a serious miscalculation, Reed. Even if you had such evidence, which I doubt bringing it forward would destroy your career, your reputation, and possibly your custody arrangement with Sophia. The prenup with Vivian has specific moral character clauses, as you well know." The threat was explicit now, leveraging Maxwell's daughter against him. Another executive added smoothly, "Besides, the boy will receive generous compensation if his work has commercial application. That's more opportunity than someone from his background could expect otherwise." The casual cruelty and entitlement in the statement crystallized everything Maxwell had been struggling to articulate to himself over the past 2 days. "That's exactly the problem," he said quietly. We have been operating as if we're entitled to take what we want from people like Elijah because we have the power to do so, as if his brilliance belongs to us simply because we have the resources to exploit it. Bradley cut him off. "Spare us the sudden crisis of conscience, Reed. You've benefited from this system your entire life. Don't pretend you're above it now because you met one gifted kid on a plane." The statement struck uncomfortably close to Maxwell's own self-doubts, but he pressed forward. "You're right that I've benefited, and I've been blind to how these systems work, but that doesn't make continuing to participate in them right." He picked up the flash drive. "I'm withdrawing as a judge, effective immediately. And unless Pinnacle publicly acknowledges Elijah's work and compensates him fairly for any use of his algorithms, this evidence goes to the Department of Justice and the press." The executives exchanged alarmed glances, but Bradley maintained his composure. "You're bluffing. You'd never risk everything you've built." Maxwell thought of Sophia sleeping peacefully under Linda Washington's watchful eye, and of Elijah facing systematic barriers with quiet dignity. "Try me," he said simply, turning to leave. He was nearly to the door when Bradley called after him, "You realize this isn't over, Reed. We've already filed the patents. The boy's work is legally ours, and we've reported him to security for corporate espionage. By morning, he'll be on his way back to Boston with nothing, and so will you." Maxwell paused without turning around. "We'll see about that." As he walked back toward the elevators, his phone buzzed with a message from hotel security. Elijah Washington had been detained on accusations of accessing proprietary company information. The confrontation Maxwell had hoped to defer until morning was now unavoidable. By the time he reached the security office, Elijah had been held for over 30 minutes without being allowed to contact his mother, a clear violation of protocols for minors. Maxwell used every ounce of his authority and legal knowledge to secure Elijah's release, but the damage was done. Pinnacle had escalated from competition manipulation to false criminal accusations. As they left the security office, Elijah turned to Maxwell with eyes that had seen too much, too young. "They're not going to let me compete tomorrow, are they? No matter what I do." The resignation in his voice made Maxwell's decision final. "They will, but not in the way they're expecting." The private jet terminal at Boston Logan International Airport buzzed with unusual activity as security personnel flanked both Maxwell Reed and Elijah Washington. The scene mirrored their first encounter days earlier, but with crucial differences. Maxwell's infant daughter, Sophia, slept peacefully in his arms, the same baby whose inconsolable crying had first brought Elijah into his life. But now, Instead of suspicion and accusation, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation as a crowd of reporters and photographers documented their arrival. "Mr. Reed, can you confirm Pinnacle Capital attempted to steal intellectual property from a minor?" shouted one journalist as cameras flashed around them. Another called out, "Elijah, how does it feel to be recognized as the rightful creator of algorithms worth potentially billions?" Maxwell placed a protective hand on Elijah's shoulder as they moved through the terminal, where Linda Washington waited with a mixture of pride and concern for her son. The events of the previous 24 hours had unfolded with stunning rapidity after Maxwell's confrontation with Bradley and the Pinnacle executives. True to their threat, security had appeared at Maxwell's suite at 5 a.m. with corporate espionage accusations against Elijah, demanding his removal from the competition. What they hadn't anticipated was Maxwell's countermove, a comprehensive data package sent simultaneously to the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, 3 national news organizations, and the presidents of MIT, Stanford, and Harvard. The package contained irrefutable evidence of Pinnacle's systematic discrimination, intellectual property theft, and corporate espionage against a 14-year-old mathematical prodigy from Roxbury. Most damning were the documented attempts to file patents based on Elijah's stolen work, complete with Bradley's recorded admissions. As the story broke across financial and educational news platforms, Pinnacle's response shifted from threatening to desperate. By mid-morning, their legal team was offering settlements that acknowledged Elijah's ownership of his algorithms and promised substantial compensation. But Maxwell and Linda, consulting with pro bono attorneys who had reached out after the story went viral, recognized the offers for what they were attempts to limit damage rather than provide justice. The mathematics competition itself had been thrown into chaos, with academic judges resigning in protest and other contestants withdrawing in solidarity with Elijah. By afternoon, Pinnacle's stock had dropped 12% as investors responded to revelations about the company's predatory practices. With the competition effectively canceled, Maxwell had arranged for their return to Boston on his private jet, a decision that raised eyebrows given his increasingly public criticism of the wealth gap that enabled such privileges. But the jet served a strategic purpose, allowing them to control their arrival and the narrative surrounding it. Now, as they moved through the terminal toward the waiting cars, Maxwell reflected on how completely his life had changed in just 3 days. His position at Pinnacle was finished, of course. The board had already issued a statement accepting his resignation, though he had offered no such thing. His considerable personal wealth remained intact, but his professional reputation in the cutthroat world of high finance was irreparably damaged, and yet he felt lighter than he had in years. Mr. Reed called a reporter he recognized from the Wall Street Journal. "Can you comment on rumors that you're establishing a new foundation with Elijah Washington?" Maxwell paused, looking to Elijah and Linda for permission before responding. "We'll be making a formal announcement next week, but yes." The Reed-Washington Initiative for Educational Equity will identify and support exceptional talents from underrepresented communities, with a focus on removing systemic barriers rather than extracting value. Linda added with quiet dignity, "Most importantly, students will retain ownership of their intellectual property, with guidance on how to protect and develop their innovations." Elijah, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal, finally spoke directly to the assembled press. "The problem isn't just about who gets opportunities," he said, his young voice steady despite the chaos around him. "It's about who gets to keep the value of what they create. For too long, systems have been designed to extract ideas from some communities while concentrating wealth in others." His articulation of the issue, remarkable for anyone, let alone a 14-year-old, immediately became the headline, quote, picked up by outlets worldwide. 5 years later, Maxwell stood in the audience at MIT's graduation ceremony, watching with paternal pride as Elijah Washington, now 19, received his dual degrees in mathematics and economics, summa cum laude. The algorithms Elijah had developed as a teenager had indeed revolutionized predictive modeling, with applications far beyond financial markets from climate science to public health. Unlike countless brilliant minds before him who had their innovations appropriated without fair compensation, Elijah had retained ownership of his intellectual property, which now formed the basis of his own research foundation. The Reed-Washington Initiative had grown into one of the most respected educational equity organizations in the country, with programs in 42 states and partnerships with leading universities and technology companies. Its flagship project, a mathematical pattern recognition system for identifying exceptional talents in under-resourced communities, had discovered over 500 students with extraordinary potential who might otherwise have been overlooked. Maxwell's personal transformation had been equally profound. His resignation from Pinnacle had led to a complete reassessment of his priorities, with Sophia now central to his life rather than an afterthought. His expertise in finance had found new purpose in helping talented young innovators protect and develop their intellectual property instead of exploiting it. The crowd applauded as Elijah concluded his commencement speech with words that resonated deeply with Maxwell. True progress isn't measured by how high a few can climb, but by how many barriers we remove so everyone can reach their potential. As the ceremony concluded, Maxwell made his way through the crowd to where Elijah stood surrounded by well-wishers. Breaking through at last, he found himself face to face with the young man who had changed his life with a simple act of kindness on a plane 5 years earlier. "Professor Washington," Maxwell said with a grin, using the title Elijah would soon carry at both MIT and Harvard. "Not bad for a kid from Roxbury." Elijah laughed and embraced him warmly. "Not bad for either of us." A tugging at Maxwell's jacket made him look down. 5-year-old Sophia, dressed in a miniature MIT t-shirt, was attempting to get Elijah's attention. "Uncle Elijah, show me the pattern again," she demanded. Smiling, Elijah knelt to her level and began the familiar sequence of taps and hums that had first calmed her as an infant. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 tap. The mathematical pattern that had once soothed a crying baby on a flight had evolved into the foundational algorithm that powered breakthroughs in fields from medicine to environmental science. But more importantly, it had created a connection between two worlds that might otherwise never have met, a connection that had changed countless lives beyond their own. As Sophia mimicked the pattern perfectly, her small fingers following the precise mathematical sequence, Maxwell reflected that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of kindness and the courage to recognize injustice, even when you've benefited from the system creating it. What do you think would happen if we all had the courage to question systems of privilege that benefit some while excluding others? Has someone from a different background ever changed your perspective in an unexpected way? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Please like this video if Elijah and Maxwell's journey touched your heart, subscribe for more powerful stories of transformation, and share this with someone who might need a reminder that standing up for what's right is always worth it. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply seeing people for who they truly are, not what systems have conditioned us to expect.